defense of political prisoners. He was a student and successfully ran a campaign to save the life of political prisoners who were being tortured. He was also a leading student activist and was arrested during the Iran student uprising in 1999. As a matter of fact, he and arrest are actually quite good friends. He was arrested 12 times by Iranian intelligence, which is why it was such a contradictory term. He received 7 years jail sentence in 2005, and thank God he fled the country. He worked in the U.S. at the International Broadcasting Bureau as a researcher, writer, and live TV show contributor on Iran for a number of years. Then he left and started working for a Washington, D.C.-based organization, Nonviolence International, and other NGOs and think tanks. He has received human rights awards, grants for his fights for human rights, and is now the executive director of the International Center for Human Rights in Toronto. His work on political prisoners and refugees are well known. He's a man who's been right in the thick of it, and it's a great pleasure to call him now to speak to us.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you, my very good friend, Ardeshir Zarezadeh, for having me this great program. Before I go to the discussion, I will just give you an overview of what's happening in Iran in respect to human rights. Thank you. I hope I finish in time. Iran, as you know, was among 48 members states of the United Nations in 1948 that unanimously adopted the Universal Human Rights Declaration. And subsequently, they ratified 2 human rights covenants. Iran also ratified international covenants on economic, social, and cultural rights. Further, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights was ratified by Iran on 23rd of March 1970. But unfortunately, times have changed, and the Iranian regime has had a long story of non-compliance with its legal obligations. The United Nations Commission on Human Rights has passed more than 20 resolutions expressing their concerns about human rights violations in Iran. In fact, the Iranian regime is a leader in suppression and human rights violation. We will never forget the mass executions of thousands of political prisoners in Iran in 1988 and years before and after that. The massacre in the summer of 1988 is one of the darkest stains in recent history, although it is relatively unknown in the West. In 2000, when I was imprisoned in prison walls of Evin in Tehran, a prisoner who was a bus driver inside the prison told me that the prisoners were being executed in groups throughout the nights. There are differences in numbers, but as many as 30,000 political prisoners or more. The overwhelming majority of them being activists of Mujahideen organizations were slaughtered in just a few days. One of the key executioners was Mustafa Mohammadi, who was appointed as the Interior Minister in 2005, and he was later appointed as Inspector General, and currently he is the Justice Minister. Interesting. This is just an example. And another example is the chain murders that occurred during President Khatami's period, during reformist period. And the chain murders refer to desperate murders of intelligence and journalists in 1998. Right after the chain murders, Iran's student uprising transpired in July '99, where I had an active role. Over 5 students and activists were killed and hundreds injured in July '99 student uprising. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei cried on national television and indirectly begged students to stop. Unfortunately, the world, US, and world powers turned their back and did not back the student movement for their struggle for democracy and human rights. As a result, almost 20,000 students and protesters were arrested and the uprising was suppressed. And then we had the Green Movement in 2009. I'm assuming that many of you have heard about the Green Movement. And maybe you heard the death of Nida Awa Sultan, young female protester. She was shot dead alongside with many others. Some prisoners were tortured and beaten to death. After the Green Movement, some political prisoners were executed. The Supreme Leader was able to suppress the opposition with the help of President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his team. In fact, during Ahmadinejad's term, hundreds of journalists, students, and human rights defenders were jailed. In 2013, supposed moderator government came to power, Hassan Rouhani. But the human rights situation in Iran has continued to deteriorate since the election of President Hassan Rouhani. I'm so sorry, I drove from Toronto today. I didn't have water, so that's why I may not pronounce well. The security agencies and police have continued to jail many activists, journalists, and human rights defenders. Examples would be Mohammad Zarezadeh and Abdul Fattah Soltani, 2 lawyers who were imprisoned on account of their peaceful or professional activities, or Mr. Hishmatullah Tabarzadeh, opposition leader. Judiciary officials continued their efforts to further erode the independence of the Iranian Bar Association and restricted the right of criminal defendants to access a lawyer of their own choosing during the investigation phase of national security cases. Right defenders reportedly, because of Nargis Mohammadi, member of band group Center for Human Rights Defenders, was arrested because of her human rights and peace activism. In 2010, the Revolutionary Court sentenced Nargis Mohammadi to 6 years in prison for her human rights activities. The government denied freedom of religion to Baha'is, Iran's largest non-Muslim religious minority, and discriminates against them. At least 74 Baha'is were held in Iran's prison as of November 2015. Security and intelligence forces have also continued to target Christian converts from Islam, Persian-speaking Protestants, and evangelical congregations, and members of the home church movement. Some faced charges such as acting against the national security and propaganda against the state. The government restricted cultural as well as political activities among the country's Azeri, Kurdish, Arab, and Baloch minorities. Thank you very much. And maybe you heard about Afghan refugees in Iran recently, and migrant workers estimated at between 2.5 and 3 million in numbers continue to face serious abuses in Iran, unfortunately. Same-sex conduct between men in Iran is punishable by death penalty. Same-sex conduct between women is punishable as well. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are subject to official harassment, arrest and detention, persecution, and ill treatment or torture. It is reported that 2/3 of women suffer domestic violence. Girls are forced to marry young. You want some alarming numbers? 48,450. Well, about 48,450 girls between the ages of 10 and 14 were met in 2011. And at least 1,538 girls under the age of 10 were met in 2012. 75 juvenile offenders have been executed in the past 10 years. And according to the United Nations data, 160 juvenile offenders are currently on death row, and we have a number of over 200 based on our own research. As of November 2015, the Iranian regime has executed at least 830 prisoners by hanging. This is for just last year. And it's important to tell you that the Iranian regime denied entry to the United Nations investigator, Dr. Ahmad Shahid, on matters related to human rights investigation. Well, this is the regime's big point. Why? Because they don't want to be under pressure on human rights issues. There are 25 out of 29 UN inquiries on specific human rights violation cases that have to this day gone unanswered. This is the regime we are currently dealing with. They killed many of my friends. Well-known blogger Sattar Beheshti was beaten to death. Omid Mirsaglafi, another blogger, died in prison in 2009 for an unknown reason. We don't know why. At a very young age. Amir Hishmat Saram, an active member of the Iranian Democratic Front, died in Rajai Shah prison. We don't know why. Akbar Mohammadi, leader, still an activist, died on hunger strike, and many others. Can we just turn a blind eye and disregard these alarming events that are happening in Iran? Or are we going to finally stand up to the oppressive regime and deal with them? The people are undeniably suffering under this oppressive and democratic system. I'm well aware of the weight the country holds in the sensitivity of the matter, but it is absolutely vital to stop the Iranian regime's domestic, regional, and international threats. And I assure that this won't be achievable if we act as this dictatorship's friend and give them the money. We have recently heard about the nuclear deal with world powers, which was officially implemented in mid-January this year. And as a result of this deal, Iran's sanctions will be lifted and the Iranian regime will receive billions of frozen funds. Well, you mentioned that obviously part of this money is going to terrorist groups. And it's interesting that John Kerry himself says that. We know part of this fund is going to terrorist groups. How we can respond to that? The US has released Iran's frozen funds, but it's very interesting that with this action, they are saying no to Iranian human rights activists. Well, I understand that maintaining diplomatic relations with the Iranian regime doesn't imply political support. But if US government or our government in Canada is going to restore their diplomatic relations with Iran, they must focus, they must place focus on and emphasis the importance of human rights, and this is our advice also to our world powers. Iranian regime was able to buy time in the past few years to develop its uranium enrichment facilities and the enrichment. But the sanctions took a toll on them, and they realized that they could not continue further. In fact, they were about to collapse under pressure, and this is why they decided to join the negotiation table. We ask Canada, United States of America, and other countries to place higher emphasis on human rights. The world should not support the Iranian regime directly or indirectly in any way, but should instead do the following. Placing sanctions against human rights violations, high-ranking Iranian regime members and IRGC commanders and members of their immediate families. Sanctioned companies, the IRG, Iranian Revolutionary Guard, holds share in and their officials and managers. Freeze the Iranian authorities' bank accounts, blocking their property and assets, and banning their trips out. Assist in circulation of free information in Iran and access to the internet. Speak out against censorship, internet filtering, blocking of satellite signals, and the surveillance of Iranian dissidents, and severely punish companies and governments who provide equipment to make this possible. Urge their allies to also end their cooperation with the Iranian regime and put sanctions into effect. Carefully ensure that the voice of opposition and human rights defenders are heard on the inside of the country, and promote human rights and democracy for Iranian people. carefully ensure the media funded by taxpayers' money do not provide platform for supporters and sympathizers of the Iranian Republic of Iran. Fight for freedom of Canadian residents Mustafa Azizi and Salim Malikpour who were jailed in Iranian prisons. Put pressure on the regime to release all political prisoners. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll conclude with this point that the reason Canadian citizen Hamid Qasemi Shah, who was under death row in Iran's Evin prison, was released 2 years ago, was that the conservative government put pressure on the Iranian regime. They closed down the embassy and imposed more sanctions. This regime is still quite fragile, and pressure will work. By doing so, not only will Iranian benefit, but the world as well. Leaving Iranians on their own to fight for democracy and human rights, while the regime continues to suppress its own people and fund terrorism,